The saloon fell silent when Ronan Hale placed his coat around the shoulders of the town fool. Eliza Crow stood shaking in the doorway, mud-streaked and trembling, while every eye in Iron Hollow turned to watch what happened next. They had mocked her for years, the strange woman who talked to herself, who wore men's boots, who had no family and no prospects. Now the most dangerous man in 3 territories was claiming her as his wife. Laughter erupted, bitter and cruel, but Ronan didn't move. He stood there, one hand steady on her shoulder, waiting for the noise to die. And in that moment, everything changed. The choice he made that night would cost him everything the town thought mattered, and give him something they couldn't understand. I'm bringing you this story from beginning to end, and I'd love for you to stay with me through all of it. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The wind came down hard off the northern ridge the day Ronan Hale walked into Iron Hollow for the last time. He rode alone, the way he always did, on a horse that looked like it had seen too many winters. People scattered when they saw him coming, not running exactly, just stepping aside, finding reasons to be somewhere else. Ronan had that effect. He was tall, broad across the shoulders, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of the same stone that made the mountains. His eyes were pale gray, the kind that didn't give anything away, and his hands were scarred from years of work no civilized man would do. He tied his horse outside the general store and went inside without saying a word to anyone. The clerk, a nervous man named Howell, nearly dropped the jar he was holding. "Mr. Hale," Howell stammered, "didn't expect to see you in town." Ronan set a list on the counter. Supplies: flour, salt, coffee, nails, rope. The kind of things a man bought when he was planning to stay, gone for a long time. Howell scanned the list and swallowed. "This is quite a bit. You heading back up to the claim?" "Further." "Further than the claim?" Ronan didn't answer. He just stood there, waiting, while Howell gathered the items with shaking hands. People talked about Ronan like he was half legend. Some said he'd killed a man in Denver over a card game. Others said he'd survived alone in the mountains through a winter that froze 3 miners to death. Nobody knew the whole truth, and Ronan never corrected them. He let people think what they wanted. It kept them at a distance, which was exactly where he preferred them. He paid in coins, each one counted out slow and deliberate, and started loading the supplies onto his horse. That was when he saw her. Eliza Crow was standing across the street, half hidden in the alley between the boarding house and the smithy. She was thin, too thin, with dark hair that hung loose and tangled around her face. Her dress was patched in a dozen places, and her boots, men's boots, too big for her, were caked in mud. She was talking to herself. Or maybe to someone who wasn't there. Her hands moved in quick, nervous gestures, and her lips kept moving even though no one was listening. A group of women walked past her, their skirts held high to avoid the mud, and one of them said something that made the others laugh. Eliza flinched, but didn't stop talking. She never did. Ronan had seen her before, of course. Everyone in Iron Hollow had. She'd been there for years, ever since her mother died and left her with nothing. No family, no money, no prospects. The town had decided long ago that Eliza Crow was touched in the head, and once a town made up its mind about someone, there was no changing it. They called her strange. Said she brought bad luck. Mothers pulled their children away when she walked by, and men made jokes about her that weren't fit to repeat. Ronan didn't know much about her, and he didn't care to. He had his own problems. But something about the way she stood there, shaking in the cold, talking to ghosts, it stuck with him. Maybe it was the way she refused to look at the women who mocked her. Or maybe it was the way her hands kept moving, like she was trying to hold on to something invisible that kept slipping away. He finished loading his horse and swung into the saddle. He should have ridden out right then, should have left Iron Hollow behind and never looked back. But instead, he sat there, watching her. She looked up, just for a second, and their eyes met. Hers were dark, almost black, and they had a sharpness to them that didn't match the rest of her. For a moment she stopped talking. Her hands went still. Then she looked away back down at the mud, and the moment was gone. Ronan turned his horse and rode toward the edge of town. He had no reason to stay, no reason to care. But when he reached the fork in the road, one path leading back to his claim, the other toward the saloon, he turned toward the saloon. The place was packed when he walked in. It always was on a Friday. Men crowded around tables, playing cards and drinking whiskey that tasted like turpentine. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of unwashed bodies. Ronan pushed his way to the bar and ordered a drink. The bartender, a man named Cullen, poured it without a word and slid it across the counter. "Heard you're heading out," Cullen said. "That's right. Where to?" "North." "How far north?" Ronan drank and didn't answer. Cullen shrugged and moved on to the next customer. That was the thing about Ronan. He didn't explain himself. He didn't owe anyone an explanation. The door banged open, and a cold gust of wind swept through the room. Eliza Crow stood in the doorway, soaked to the skin, her hair plastered to her face. The room went quiet. Not silent, but quiet enough that everyone noticed. She stood there, shivering, looking around like she didn't know where she was. One of the men at this card table laughed. "Look who it is, the town ghost." "She lost or just stupid?" another one said. Eliza's lips moved, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted from face to face, searching for something. Kindness, maybe. Or just a reason to stay. She didn't find it. "Someone get her out of here?" a woman's voice called from the back. "She's dripping all over the floor." More laughter. Cruel, easy laughter. The kind that came when people were bored and mean and looking for a target. Eliza wrapped her arms around herself and started to back toward the door. Ronan set his glass down. He didn't think about it. Didn't plan it. He just stood up, crossed the room, and took off his coat. The laughter died. Every eye in the saloon turned to watch as he draped the heavy coat around Eliza's shoulders. It swallowed her, hanging down past her knees, but she clutched it tight, her fingers digging into the rough wool. "You're coming with me," Ronan said. Her eyes went wide. "What?" "You're coming with me," he repeated, louder this time, so everyone could hear. "We're getting married!" The room erupted. Not with cheers or congratulations, but with shock and disbelief, and then, inevitably, laughter. Harder and louder than before. "You're joking," someone said. "He's lost his mind," another voice added. A man named Garrett, who ran the land office, stood up from his table. "Ronan, you've had too much to drink. Go sleep it off." Ronan turned to face him. "I'm sober." "Then you're a fool." "Maybe." Garrett shook his head. "You're really going to marry her? Eliza Crow? The woman who talks to herself and sleeps in the church cellar?" "That's right." "Why?" Ronan looked at Eliza, who was staring at him like he'd just spoken a language she didn't understand. "Because I'm asking her, and she gets to say yes or no. That's how it works." "That's not how anything works," Garrett said. "You don't just marry some what?" Ronan's voice was quiet, but there was steel in it. Garrett shut his mouth. Ronan turned back to Eliza. "You want to stay here?" She shook her head. "Then come with me." I don't understand." "You don't have to. Just say yes or no." She looked around the room, at the faces that had mocked her, ignored her, dismissed her for as long as she could remember. Then she looked back at Ronan. "Yes," she whispered. The laughter stopped. Ronan took her hand. It was small and cold and shaking, but she didn't pull away. He led her toward the door, and the crowd parted to let them through. Nobody said a word. They just stared, too stunned to react. Outside, the rain had started again, cold and steady. Ronan helped Eliza onto his horse and climbed up behind her. She sat stiff and unmoving, like she was afraid if she breathed too hard, the whole thing would fall apart. "Where are we going?" she asked. "North," Ronan said, "far enough that they can't find us." "Why are you doing this?" He didn't have a good answer for that. Maybe it was because he was tired of watching people get trampled. Maybe it was because he saw something in her that reminded him of himself. Or maybe it was just because he could, and no one else would. "Does it matter?" he asked. She thought about it. No. They rode out of Iron Hollow that night, and they didn't look back. The land north of Iron Hollow was brutal. It wasn't the kind of place people went unless they had no other choice. The trails were rough and overgrown, winding through forests so thick the sun barely reached the ground. The mountains loomed in the distance, jagged and indifferent, their peaks covered in snow even in summer. Ronan led the way without hesitation, like he'd made the journey 100 times before. Eliza didn't speak for the first 2 days. She rode behind him, silent and watchful, her hands gripping the edge of the saddle. At night, Ronan built a fire and cooked whatever game he'd managed to catch. She ate without complaint, even when the food was tough and tasteless. She didn't ask questions, didn't argue, she just followed. On the third day, she finally spoke. "Do you regret it?" Ronan was checking the horse's shoes, crouched down in the mud. He looked up. "Regret what?" "Bringing me with you." "No." "Why not?" "Because I don't waste time on regret." She watched him for a long moment, her dark eyes unreadable. "People will talk. Let them. They'll say you're crazy." "They already do." She almost smiled. It was small and fleeting, but it was there. Ronan went back to the horse, and Eliza wrapped his coat tighter around her shoulders. By the end of the week, they reached the place Ronan had been heading toward. It wasn't much. A clearing in the forest surrounded by tall pines and thick underbrush. A creek ran along the eastern edge, cold and clear, and the ground was rocky but flat enough to build on. There was no house, no shelter, nothing but wilderness. Eliza climbed down from the horse and looked around. "This is it? This is it. What are we supposed to do here? Survive." She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "I don't know how to survive out here." "You'll learn." And she did. The first few weeks were hell. Ronan worked from dawn until dark, clearing land and building a rough cabin out of logs he cut himself. Eliza tried to help, but she was clumsy and weak, unused to physical labor. She dropped tools, cut herself on the saw, and once nearly set the whole clearing on fire trying to start a cook fire. Ronan didn't yell at her, he just showed her how to do it right and made her try again. At night they slept on opposite sides of the fire. Ronan didn't touch her, didn't push for anything she wasn't ready to give. He told her they were married, but he didn't act like it. He treated her like a partner, not a possession. It was strange and unfamiliar, and Eliza didn't know what to make of it. One night, as they sat by the fire, she asked him the question that had been gnawing at her since they left. "Why did you really choose me?" Ronan poked at the fire with a stick. "Because you needed someone to choose you." "That's not a reason. It's the only one I've got." She pulled her knees to her chest and stared into the flames. "People always said I was broken, that something was wrong with me." "Is there?" She hesitated. "I don't know, maybe. I see things sometimes, hear things. My mother said it was a gift, but everyone else said it was a curse." "What do you think?" I think it doesn't matter what I call it. It's still there." Ronan nodded, then stopped trying to explain it to people who won't listen. She looked at him, surprised. "You don't think I'm crazy?" "I think you're here, and that's enough." It was the kindest thing anyone had ever said to her. The cabin took shape slowly. 4 walls, a roof, a door that didn't quite hang straight. It wasn't beautiful, but it was solid. Ronan built a fireplace out of river stones, and Eliza stitched together scraps of fabric to make curtains for the single window. They worked side by side, and with each passing day, the silence between them grew more comfortable. Eliza learned how to set snares for rabbits and skin them without flinching. She learned which plants were safe to eat and which ones would make you sick. She learned how to sharpen a knife, how to stack firewood so it wouldn't rot, how to read the sky for signs of a coming storm. She made mistakes, lots of them, but she kept trying, and slowly she stopped feeling like a burden. One morning, Ronan woke to find her standing at the edge of the clearing, staring out at the forest. Her hair was tied back, and she was holding an axe he'd made for her, smaller and lighter than his own. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I'm going to clear that section," she said, pointing to a thick tangle of brush. "We need more space if we're going to plant anything next spring." Ronan raised an eyebrow. "That's hard work." "I know. You sure you can handle it?" She turned to look at him, and there was something fierce in her eyes. "I'm sure." He didn't argue, he just handed her a pair of gloves and got to work on his own section. By the end of the day, she'd cleared more ground than he expected. Her hands were blistered and her back ached, but she didn't complain. That night, she sat by the fire with a satisfied smile on her face. "I did good today," she said. "You did." "I'm stronger than I thought." "I know." She looked at him, and for the first time he saw something other than fear in her eyes. She saw possibility. Winter came fast and hard. The snow piled up in drifts taller than the cabin, and the wind howled through the trees like something alive. They burned through their firewood faster than Ronan had planned, and there were days when the cold was so brutal that all they could do was huddle by the fire and wait for it to pass. But they didn't starve. They didn't freeze. They survived. And somewhere in the middle of that brutal winter, something shifted between them. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was trust. Ronan stopped sleeping on the opposite side of the fire. Eliza stopped flinching when he came too close. They started talking more, sharing stories about the people they'd been before they met. Ronan told her about growing up in a mining camp, about the men who worked themselves to death for scraps of silver, about the day he walked away from all of it and never looked back. Eliza told him about her mother, who had visions and predictions that sometimes came true, and about the way the town turned on them after her mother died. They said she was a witch, Eliza said quietly. They said I would be one too. What do you say? She shrugged. I say I don't care what they think anymore. Ronan smiled. Good. By the time spring arrived, the clearing had transformed. The cabin stood sturdy and weatherproof, smoke rising from the chimney. The ground around it had been cleared and turned, ready for planting, and Eliza had changed too. She was no longer the trembling woman who had stood in the saloon doorway. Her hands were rough and strong, her face browned by the sun, her eyes sharp and steady. One afternoon, as they worked in the garden, Eliza paused and looked at Ronan. Thank you, she said. For what? For choosing me. He didn't say anything. He just reached out and took her hand, and they stood there together, dirt under their nails and sweat on their brows, while the sun set over the mountains. And that was when the first stranger arrived. The stranger was a young man, maybe 20, with a gaunt face and clothes that had seen better days. He stumbled into the clearing just before dusk, leading a limping mule and looking like he'd been traveling for weeks without a decent meal. Ronan saw him first and reached for the rifle he kept propped against the cabin wall. Easy, the young man said, raising his hands. I'm not looking for trouble. Then what are you looking for? Ronan asked, not lowering the rifle. Just a place to rest. Maybe some water. He swayed on his feet and the mule nudged him from behind like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Eliza appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. She took one look at the stranger and said, He's half-starved. That's not our problem, Ronan said. It is now. She stepped past him and walked toward the young man. What's your name? Ben, he said. Ben Carter. Well, Ben Carter, you look like you're about to fall over. Come inside. Ronan lowered the rifle but didn't put it down. He watched as Eliza led Ben into the cabin and sat him down at the rough-hewn table they'd built over the winter. She poured him water from the pitcher and started cutting slices from the venison they'd smoked the week before. What are you doing out here alone? She asked. Ben drank the water in 3 long gulps and wiped his mouth. Running, same as everyone else who ends up this far north. Running from what? Debt, bad decisions, people who don't forget. He looked around the cabin, taking in the simple furniture, the shelves lined with jarred vegetables, the dried herbs hanging from the ceiling. You two live here by yourselves? That's right, Ronan said from the doorway. That's something. Ben took a bite of the venison and closed his eyes. This is the best thing I've eaten in a month. Eliza sat down across from him. Where were you headed? Nowhere in particular, just away. Well, you can stay the night, she said. But only the night. Ronan shot her a look, but she ignored him. Ben finished eating, and Eliza showed him to the small lean-to Ronan had built on the side of the cabin for storage. It wasn't much, but it was dry and out of the wind. Ben thanked her 3 times and looked like he might cry. After he was settled, Eliza and Ronan stood outside in the fading light. We don't need strangers here, Ronan said. He's just a boy. He's trouble, maybe. Or maybe he's just lost. She crossed her arms. We were lost once too. Ronan didn't have an answer for that. He went back inside and Eliza stayed outside for a while, staring at the darkening trees. Something had shifted in her over the winter. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thinking ahead, planning, imagining what this place could become. And that scared Ronan more than he wanted to admit. Ben left the next morning, but not before Ronan gave him a sack of dried meat and some coffee. The boy thanked them again, promised he'd never forget their kindness, and disappeared down the trail leading south. Ronan thought that would be the end of it. He was wrong. 2 weeks later, another stranger showed up. This time, it was a woman in her 30s with a baby strapped to her chest and a black eye that had already started to yellow. She didn't say much, just asked if she could rest for a few hours. Eliza let her in without hesitation. The woman stayed 2 days, sleeping in the lean-to and helping Eliza with the garden. When she left, she told them her name was Sarah and that she'd heard about them from a boy she'd met on the road. Said there was a couple living up north who didn't ask questions, Sarah said. Said they helped him when no one else would. After Sarah came an old man with a cough that rattled in his chest. Then a family of 4 who'd lost their farm to a bank. Then 2 brothers who'd gotten on the wrong side of a mining boss. One by one, they trickled in, drawn by rumors of a place where outcasts could find refuge. Most of them stayed a few days and moved on. But some stayed longer, and a few never left at all. By midsummer, the clearing had grown into something that resembled a settlement. There were 3 additional cabins, rough and uneven but functional. A communal fire pit sat in the center, surrounded by stumps that served as seats. The garden had expanded to twice its original size, and there was a makeshift corral for the animals people brought with them. Mules, goats, a few chickens. Ronan hated it. "This isn't what I came here for," he told Eliza one night as they lay in bed. "I came here to get away from people." "I know," she said. "Then why are you letting them stay?" "Because they have nowhere else to go. That's not our responsibility." She rolled over to face him. "Whose responsibility is it then?" He didn't answer. He just stared at the ceiling and listened to the sounds outside. Voices talking, someone laughing, a child crying. The wilderness he'd claimed for himself was disappearing, replaced by the very thing he'd been trying to escape. But Eliza thrived. She moved through the settlement like she'd been doing it her whole life, organizing work crews, settling disputes, teaching people how to preserve food and treat minor injuries. The woman who used to talk to herself in the streets of Iron Hollow was now the heart of a growing community. People listened to her, trusted her. And Ronan watched it happen with a mixture of pride and resentment. One afternoon, a man named Thomas approached Ronan while he was chopping wood. Thomas was one of the first to arrive after Ben, a carpenter who'd fled north after his wife died and left him with debts he couldn't pay. He was good with his hands and had helped build most of the new cabins. "We need to talk about structure," Thomas said. Ronan split a log and tossed the pieces onto the pile. "What kind of structure?" "Rules, organization. We've got nearly 20 people here now, and it's only going to grow. We need someone in charge." "I'm not in charge of anyone." "Maybe not, but Eliza is." Ronan stopped mid-swing and looked at him. "What are you talking about?" "People come to her with problems. She's the one making decisions. She's the one holding this place together." Thomas gestured toward the settlement. "You built the foundation, Ronan, but she's building the house." "I didn't ask for a house." "Doesn't matter. You've got one." That night, Ronan confronted Eliza. "Thomas says you're running things now." She was stirring a pot of stew over the fire. "I'm not running anything. I'm just helping." "Helping with what?" "With whatever needs doing." She tasted the stew and added more salt. "Margaret's baby was sick last week. I made a poultice that brought the fever down. Samuel didn't know how to set snares, so I showed him. Lena wanted to learn how to read, so I've been teaching her at night." "You're turning this into a town." "I'm turning this into a home." "For who?" She set the spoon down and looked at him. "For people who don't have one." They didn't speak for the rest of the night. Ronan slept outside by the fire, and Eliza stayed in the cabin. It was the first real fight they'd had, and it left a coldness between them that lasted for days. But the settlement kept growing. By the time autumn arrived, there were nearly 30 people living in the clearing. They'd built a smokehouse, a root cellar, and a communal storage shed. The children, there were 5 of them now, ran wild through the trees, their laughter echoing through the forest. And Eliza had started holding evening gatherings around the fire, where people shared stories and sang songs and forgot, for a little while, about the lives they'd left behind. Ronan stood at the edge of it all, watching. He felt like a stranger in the place he'd built. These people looked to Eliza for guidance, for comfort, for answers. They barely noticed him unless they needed something heavy moved or a tree felled. He'd become a tool, useful but unremarkable. One evening, as the settlement gathered around the fire, a woman named Clara stood up and addressed the crowd. "I think we should give this place a name," she said. "It's not just a clearing anymore, it's a community, and communities need names." People murmured in agreement. Someone suggested refuge. Another suggested haven. But it was a young girl named Anna, no more than 7, who spoke up and said, "We should call it Hale's Crossing, Because Mr. Hale brought us here. The crowd went quiet. All eyes turned to Ronan, who was sitting on a stump at the far edge of the circle. He didn't say anything, didn't nod or smile or acknowledge the suggestion. He just stood up and walked away into the darkness. Eliza found him an hour later, standing by the creek. The water moved fast and cold, black under the moonlight. "They want to name it after you," she said. "I heard." "You could have said something." "What was I supposed to say?" "Thank you, maybe. Or that you're honored." He turned to face her. "I'm not honored. I'm angry." "Why?" "Because this isn't what I wanted. I didn't come here to build a town. I came here to be alone." "You're not alone," she said quietly. "You have me." "Do I?" The question hung in the air between them. Eliza took a step closer. "What does that mean?" "It means you've been so busy taking care of everyone else that you've forgotten why we came here in the first place. And why did we come here? To get away from people who judge us, people who decide what we're worth before they even know us. These people aren't like that," Eliza said. "They're just trying to survive. So were we. And we did. We survived. And now we're doing more than that. We're building something that matters." "To who?" "To everyone here. To me." She reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "Ronan, please, don't shut me out." "I'm not shutting you out. I'm just telling you the truth. This place isn't mine anymore. It's yours. And I don't know where that leaves me." She stared at him, hurt flashing across her face. "It leaves you right here. With me. If you want to be." "I don't know if I do." He regretted the words the moment they left his mouth, but it was too late. Eliza stepped back like he'd struck her. She didn't cry, didn't yell. She just turned and walked back toward the settlement, leaving him alone by the creek. Ronan stayed there until dawn, staring at the water and hating himself. The next few weeks were tense. Ronan and Eliza spoke only when necessary, their conversations clipped and formal. The settlement continued to grow, oblivious to the fracture between the two people who'd started it all. New families arrived. A trapper named Josiah set up a trading post in one of the cabins, bartering goods with travelers passing through. A woman named Ruth, who'd been a school teacher before her husband died, started holding lessons for the children under a large oak tree. And Eliza kept working. She was everywhere, tending to the sick, settling disputes, teaching skills, organizing work crews. She moved through the settlement with a quiet determination that people respected, and Ronan watched from a distance, feeling more isolated than he'd ever felt in the mountains alone. One morning, a rider came into the settlement at full gallop, his horse lathered and wild-eyed. He was young, barely out of his teens, and he was shouting before he even dismounted. "Fever," he gasped. "There's fever in the southern camps. It's spreading fast." People gathered around him, their faces tight with worry. Fever was a death sentence in the wilderness. No doctors, no medicine, no way to stop it once it started. "How many are sick?" Thomas asked. "Dozens, maybe more. It started 2 weeks ago in a mining camp near Red Creek. Now it's everywhere." Eliza pushed through the crowd. "What kind of fever?" "High, burning. People are delirious. Some of them are dying." "Has it reached here?" "Not yet, but it will." The settlement erupted in panic. People started talking over each other, voices rising in fear. Some wanted to leave immediately, to pack up and head further north before the sickness arrived. Others wanted to fortify, to isolate themselves and hope it passed them by. Eliza raised her voice. "Everyone, calm down." The crowd went quiet. "We're not running," she said, "and we're not hiding. If the fever comes, we'll deal with it." "How?" someone shouted. "We don't have a doctor." "No, but we have each other." She looked around at the faces staring at her. "We've survived everything this land has thrown at us. We'll survive this too." Ronan stood at the back of the crowd, watching her. She looked tired, her face drawn and pale, but her voice was steady. People believed her. They wanted to believe her. And Ronan realized, with a sinking feeling in his chest, that she was all they had. That night, the first case appeared. It was Margaret, the woman with the baby. She collapsed near the fire pit, shaking and drenched in sweat. Eliza was there in seconds, kneeling beside her, pressing a hand to her forehead. "Get her inside," Eliza ordered, "and keep everyone else away." They carried Margaret to one of the empty cabins and laid her on a cot. Eliza stayed with her through the night, wiping her forehead with cool water and forcing her to drink. By morning, 2 more people had fallen sick. By the end of the week, it was 10. The settlement descended into chaos. People were terrified, locking themselves in their cabins and refusing to come out. The work stopped. The fire pit sat cold and empty, and the sick kept getting sicker. Ronan found Eliza in the cabin they'd set aside for the ill. She was leaning over a young boy named Peter, trying to get him to drink from a cup. Her hands were shaking, and there were dark circles under her eyes. "You need to rest," Ronan said. "I can't. You're going to collapse." Then I collapse. She turned to face him, and he saw the desperation in her eyes. "I don't know what to do, Ronan. I've tried everything I can think of, and people are still dying." "How many?" "3 so far, and more will follow if I can't figure this out." He crossed the room and took the cup from her hands. "You can't do this alone." "I don't have a choice." "Yes, you do." He set the cup down and placed his hands on her shoulders. "You have me." She looked up at him, and for the first time in weeks, the wall between them cracked. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know. What if I can't save them?" "Then we'll bury them together, but you don't quit. Not now." She closed her eyes and leaned into him, just for a moment. Then she pulled away and wiped her face. "I need to think. There has to be something I'm missing. Tell me what you need." She looked around this cabin, at the sick people lying on cots, their faces flushed and their breathing labored. "I need willow bark, lots of it, and yarrow. And—" She paused, her brow furrowing. "And I need you to trust me." "I do. Even if what I'm doing doesn't make sense?" "Especially then." She nodded, and something shifted in her expression. A resolve, a clarity. "Then let's get to work." For the next 3 days, Ronan and Eliza worked side by side. They stripped bark from willow trees and boiled it into tea. They gathered yarrow and made poultices. Eliza mixed remedies she remembered from her mother, things she'd been told never to speak of because people would call her a witch. She didn't care anymore. People were dying, and she would use every tool she had to stop it. Slowly, impossibly, it started to work. The fevers broke. The shaking stopped. One by one, the sick began to recover. Margaret sat up for the first time in a week and asked for her baby. Peter's color returned, and he started asking for food. The settlement, which had been holding its breath, began to exhale. But the work wasn't done. 2 more cases appeared, then 1 more. Eliza treated them all, and Ronan stayed by her side, fetching water, holding down patients who thrashed in delirium, and keeping the fire going so she could boil her remedies. On the 10th day, the last patient recovered. The settlement gathered around the fire pit that night, the first time they'd all been together since the fever started. People were quiet, exhausted, but alive. Someone brought out a jug of whiskey, and they passed it around. Eliza sat on a stump, staring into the flames, too tired to move. Clara stood up, her voice shaking. "We need to say thank you to Eliza. She saved us." The crowd murmured in agreement. One by one, people stood and spoke. They thanked her for the long nights, for the remedies, for refusing to give up. Some of them cried. Eliza didn't say anything. She just nodded and stared at the fire. When the last person finished speaking, Ronan stood. "She didn't do it alone," he said, "but she did it when no one else could. And that's worth remembering." He looked at Eliza, and she looked back at him. And in that moment, the anger and the resentment and the fear melted away. They weren't perfect. They fought. They doubted. But they were still here, still standing. The settlement voted the next day to officially name the place Hale's Crossing. Ronan didn't argue this time. He just nodded and went back to work. And for the first time in months, he and Eliza slept in the same bed, her head resting on his chest, his arm wrapped around her shoulders. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The silence said everything. Winter came early that year, arriving in October with a blizzard that buried the settlement under 3 feet of snow in a single night. Ronan woke to find the door frozen shut and had to kick it open, sending chunks of ice scattering across the floor. Eliza was already awake, standing by the window and staring out at the white expanse that had swallowed everything familiar. "We're going to need more firewood," she said. "I know. And the roof on Thomas's cabin won't hold if we get much more snow. I'll check it after breakfast." She turned to look at him. "Are we ready for this?" He didn't answer right away. The truth was, he didn't know. They'd survived one winter in the wilderness, but that had been just the two of them. Now there were 43 people depending on the food they'd stored, the shelters they'd built, the plans they'd made. One mistake, one miscalculation, and people would die. "We'll find out," he said. The first week was brutal. The temperature dropped so low that water froze solid in the buckets overnight. People huddled in their cabins, burning through firewood faster than anyone had anticipated. The children stopped playing outside, the animals grew listless and thin, and the snow kept falling. Ronan organized work crews to clear paths between the cabins and reinforce the roofs. Thomas led a team to the forest to cut more firewood, working in shifts because no one could stay out in the cold for more than an hour without risking frostbite. Eliza rationed the food stores, calculating and recalculating how long their supplies would last if the winter stretched into April or May. One night, as they lay in bed listening to the wind howl, Eliza said, "We should have stored more grain. We stored what we could. It's not enough." "Then we'll make it enough." She rolled over to face him. "How?" "I don't know yet." It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was the only one he had. The next morning, he called a meeting in the largest cabin, the one they'd started using for gatherings when the weather was too harsh for the fire pit. People crowded inside, their breath visible in the cold air, their faces drawn with worry. "We need to talk about food," Ronan said. A murmur ran through the crowd. Everyone had been thinking it, but no one wanted to say it out loud. "We have enough to last until March if we're careful," Eliza added. "But that means smaller portions, no waste, and we need to start hunting, even in this weather." "Hunting in a blizzard is suicide," Josiah said. He was the trapper, the one who knew the wilderness better than anyone except Ronan. "The game's all hunkered down. You won't find anything." "We have to try," Ronan said. "And if you freeze to death trying, then someone else will take over." The room went quiet. People shifted uncomfortably, avoiding each other's eyes. Finally, Thomas spoke up. "I'll go with you." "So will I," said a man named Lewis, one of the newer arrivals. "And me," added Samuel, the young man Eliza had taught to set snares. Ronan looked at them. These men who'd come to Hale's Crossing broken and desperate, now willing to risk their lives to keep everyone else alive. He nodded. "We leave at first light." They set out the next morning, 4 men on foot, carrying rifles and packs loaded with rope and knives. The snow was waist-deep in places, and the cold cut through their layers of wool and fur like they were made of paper. They walked for hours, following game trails that were barely visible under the snow, looking for any sign of deer or elk. By midday, they'd found nothing. By afternoon, Lewis was shivering so hard he couldn't hold his rifle steady. Ronan called a halt, and they built a fire in the shelter of a rock outcropping, huddling around it until feeling returned to their fingers and toes. "This is pointless," Lewis said through chattering teeth. "There's nothing out here." "There's always something," Ronan said. "We just have to find it." But as the sun began to set and the temperature dropped even further, he started to wonder if Lewis was right. They were burning energy they couldn't afford to lose, risking frostbite and worse, all for a hunt that might yield nothing. He was about to call it and head back when Thomas pointed into the trees. There, Ronan followed his gaze and saw it. A deer, a young buck, standing motionless about 50 yards away. It was watching them, its ears twitching, trying to decide whether to bolt or stay. Ronan raised his rifle slowly, barely breathing. The deer took a step forward, then another. Ronan squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed through the forest, and the deer dropped. They field-dressed it quickly, their hands numb and clumsy, and started the long trek back to the settlement. By the time they arrived, it was full dark and they were all half frozen, but they had meat. Enough for a week, maybe more if they stretched it. People came out of their cabins to meet them, their faces lighting up at the sight of the deer. Eliza was there too, and she looked at Ronan with something that might have been relief or gratitude or both. "You did it," she said. "Barely. Still counts." They butchered the deer that night and hung the meat in the smokehouse. It wasn't enough to solve their problems, but it was enough to give people hope. And hope, Ronan was learning, was sometimes more valuable than food. The hunting trips continued through December and into January. Some days they came back with game. Other days they came back empty-handed, exhausted and frostbitten. But they kept going because the alternative was starvation. Eliza, meanwhile, focused on keeping people healthy. The close quarters and harsh conditions were a breeding ground for sickness, and she spent her days checking on families, treating coughs and fevers, and making sure everyone had enough to eat. She set up a rotation system where the healthiest adults took turns caring for the children, the elderly, and the sick, ensuring no one was left to struggle alone. One afternoon, she found a young woman named Catherine sitting alone in her cabin, staring at the wall. Catherine had arrived at Hale's Crossing in the fall with her husband, but he died during the fever outbreak. She hadn't spoken much since. "Catherine," Eliza said gently, sitting down beside her, "have you eaten today?" Catherine didn't respond. "You need to eat. You're getting too thin." "What's the point?" Catherine's voice was flat, empty. "The point is surviving." "Why? So I can keep living without him?" Eliza didn't have an easy answer for that. She'd never lost someone the way Catherine had. But she understood loneliness. She understood the feeling that the world had moved on without you and left you behind. "Because he would want you to," Eliza said finally, "and because the rest of us need you." Catherine turned to look at her. "Need me for what?" "For whatever comes next. We're all holding each other up right now. If you fall, we all feel it." It wasn't much, but it was true. Catherine's eyes filled with tears, and Eliza put her arm around her shoulders and let her cry. They sat like that for a long time, two women in a frozen cabin, holding on to each other because there was nothing else to hold on to. By February, the food situation had become critical. They were down to half rations, and people were getting desperate. Arguments broke out over small things. Who got the last piece of bread? Who was hoarding supplies? Who wasn't pulling their weight? The unity that had held them together during the fever was fraying, pulled apart by hunger and cold and fear. Ronan tried to keep order, but it was like trying to hold water in his hands. People didn't listen the way they used to. They were too tired, too hungry, too broken. One night, a fight broke out between two men over a stolen potato. It escalated quickly, fists flying, until Ronan had to physically pull them apart. "Enough!" he shouted. "We're not doing this. We're not turning on each other." "Easy for you to say," one of the men spat. "You're not the one starving." "We're all starving," Ronan shot back, "and fighting about it isn't going to fill your belly." "Then what will?" Ronan didn't have an answer. He just stood there, breathing hard, while the crowd dispersed and went back to their cabins. Eliza found him later, sitting alone by the cold fire pit. "We're losing them," he said. "I know. What are we supposed to do?" She sat down beside him. "We keep going. What else can we do?" "I don't know if that's enough anymore." "It has to be." But even Eliza's optimism was starting to crack. She was exhausted, running herself into the ground trying to care for everyone, and it was starting to show. She'd lost weight, her face gaunt and pale, and there were moments when Ronan caught her staring into space, her expression blank and distant. One night in late February, everything came to a head. A family, a man, his wife, and their two children, tried to leave in the middle of the night, taking more than their share of the food supplies with them. Someone saw them and raised the alarm, and by the time Ronan got there, a mob had formed outside their cabin. "Thieves!" someone shouted. "They're stealing from us. We should take it back." The man stood in the doorway holding a sack of grain, his face pale but defiant. "We're just trying to survive." "So are we," Thomas said, "and you're taking food out of our children's mouths." "We have children too." The crowd surged forward, and for a moment Ronan thought they were going to tear the man apart. He stepped between them, his rifle in his hands. "Back off," he said quietly. "They're thieves, Ronan." "I said back off." The crowd hesitated, then slowly retreated. Ronan turned to the man in the doorway. "Put the sack down. We need it. So does everyone else. We'll die out there without supplies." "Then don't go." The man's wife appeared behind him, holding their youngest child. She looked terrified. "Please," she said. "We just want to leave." "Then leave," Ronan said. "But you don't get to take more than you came with." The man looked like he wanted to argue, but his wife put a hand on his arm and shook her head. He set the sack down and picked up a smaller pack. They left that night, walking into the darkness, and no one tried to stop them. The next morning, Eliza found the sack of grain they'd left behind and distributed it evenly among the remaining families. It wasn't much, but it was something. That night, she and Ronan sat in their cabin, not speaking, just listening to the wind outside. "Do you think they'll make it?" Eliza asked. "I don't know." I hope they do. Why? They tried to rob us. Because they were scared. And scared people do desperate things. She looked at him. We're all one bad day away from being them. He wanted to argue, but he couldn't. She was right. They were all hanging by a thread, and it wouldn't take much to break it. March arrived with a thaw that was almost cruel in its slowness. The snow melted inch by inch, revealing dead grass and frozen ground. The hunting improved slightly, enough to ease the worst of the hunger, but the damage had been done. The settlement felt different now, fractured and wary. People didn't gather around the fire pit the way they used to. They kept to themselves, guarding what little they had. Ronan and Eliza tried to hold things together, but it was exhausting. Every day brought a new problem. A collapsed roof, a sick child, an argument over firewood. They dealt with each one as it came, but it felt like they were bailing water out of a sinking ship. One afternoon, Eliza was in the cabin they used for treating the sick when a young girl named Lily came running in, her face pale with fear. "It's my brother," she gasped. "He's burning up." Eliza grabbed her bag and followed Lily to her family's cabin. Inside, a boy of maybe 6 lay on a cot, his face flushed and his breathing shallow. Eliza pressed a hand to his forehead and felt the heat radiating off him. "How long has he been like this?" she asked. "Since this morning," Lily's mother said. "I thought it was just a cold, but it's not a cold." Eliza's mind was already racing, running through possibilities. Fever, chills, rapid breathing. It could be pneumonia, or it could be something worse. She spent the next 2 days at the boy's side, trying every remedy she knew. Willow bark tea to bring down the fever, poultices to ease the cough, cool compresses to keep him from overheating. But nothing worked. The boy got worse, his breathing more labored, his skin pale and clammy. On the 3rd day, he stopped breathing. Eliza tried everything. She pounded on his chest, forced air into his lungs, begged him to come back. But he was gone. She sat back on her heels, her hands shaking, and stared at the small, still body on the cot. Lily's mother let out a sound that wasn't quite human, a wail of grief so raw it made Eliza's chest ache. She wanted to say something, to offer comfort, but there were no words. Nothing she could say would bring the boy back. Ronan found her hours later, sitting alone in the dark cabin. He didn't ask what happened. He could see it in her face. "I couldn't save him," she said. "You did everything you could." It wasn't enough. He knelt beside her and took her hands. They were cold, the fingers stiff and unresponsive. "You can't save everyone, Eliza." "Then what's the point?" Her voice cracked. "What's the point of any of this if people still die? The point is that most of them live. Because of you. That's not good enough." "It has to be." She pulled her hands away and stood up. "I need to be alone." He wanted to argue, to make her stay, but he knew better. He left her there and went back to the settlement, where people were already gathering for the burial. They dug a grave at the edge of the clearing, the ground still half frozen, and lowered the boy's body into it wrapped in a blanket. Lily's mother couldn't stop crying. Her husband stood beside her, his face blank and empty, like something inside him had broken. Eliza didn't come to the burial. Ronan looked for her afterward and found her by the creek, sitting on a rock and staring at the water. He sat down beside her, and they stayed there until the sun went down and the cold drove them back inside. That night, lying in bed, Eliza said, "I'm tired, Ronan." "I know. I don't know how much longer I can do this." "Then don't." She looked at him. "What?" "If you need to stop, then stop. The world won't end if you take a day for yourself." "Yes, it will. People need me. People need you alive more than they need you perfect." She didn't say anything, but she moved closer and rested her head on his shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her and held her while she cried, silent tears that soaked into his shirt. And when she finally fell asleep, exhausted and broken, he stayed awake, watching over her the way she'd watched over everyone else. The thaw continued through late March, and with it came the first signs of spring. Green shoots appeared in the garden. The animals grew more active, and one morning, as Ronan was chopping wood, he heard voices coming from the trail. He looked up and saw a group of riders approaching, maybe a dozen of them, leading pack mules loaded with supplies. He grabbed his rifle and called for Thomas. By the time the riders reached the settlement, half the population had gathered to meet them. The lead rider dismounted, a tall man with a weathered face and gray in his beard. "We're looking for Hale's Crossing," he said. "You found it," Ronan replied. "Who are you?" "Name's Daniel Worth. We're from the mining camp south of Red Creek." He gestured to the men behind him. "We heard about what you did during the fever, how you saved people when no one else would." Ronan glanced at Eliza, who had come out of the cabin and was standing at the edge of the crowd. Her face was wary, uncertain. "We didn't do it for recognition," Ronan said. "We know." Daniel reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a sack. "That's why we brought this." He handed the sack to Ronan. Inside was grain, pounds and pounds of it, more than they'd had in months. Ronan stared at it, not understanding. "We wanted to thank you," Daniel said. "You didn't have to help anyone, but you did. And some of the people you saved, they were ours, our families, our friends." He looked past Ronan to Eliza. "My daughter was one of them. You kept her alive when I thought I'd lost her. I owe you more than I can ever repay." Eliza stepped forward, her eyes glistening. "You don't owe us anything." "Maybe not, but we're giving it anyway." Daniel gestured to the mules. "We brought food, tools, fabric, whatever we could spare. It's not much, but it's yours." The settlement stood in stunned silence. Then someone started clapping. Then another. And then everyone was clapping, cheering, their voices rising into the cold morning air. Eliza stood there, tears streaming down her face, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled. That night, they held a feast. The first real meal in months, with fresh bread and roasted meat and vegetables from the supplies Daniel's group had brought. People laughed and talked and sang, their voices filling the settlement with warmth. Eliza sat beside Ronan, her hand in his, and watched it all with something close to wonder. "We did this," she said quietly. "You did this." "No, we did." She squeezed his hand. "I couldn't have done it without you." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just kissed her forehead and held her close. And as the fire burned and the people celebrated, Ronan allowed himself, for the first time in a long time, to believe that maybe everything would be okay. Spring brought more than just warmth and green shoots pushing through the thawed ground. It brought people. Word had spread through the mining camps, the trading posts, the scattered homesteads that dotted the frontier. Hale's Crossing wasn't just a settlement anymore. It was a refuge, a place where outcasts could start over, where the broken could heal, where second chances weren't just promised, but delivered. By May, the population had swelled to nearly 70. New cabins went up every week, built by crews that worked from dawn to dusk. The garden expanded to cover nearly 2 acres, rows of vegetables planted in careful lines. Josiah's trading post became a hub of activity, with travelers stopping to barter goods and share news from the outside world. And Ruth's school grew from 5 children to 18, their voices carrying through the settlement as they recited lessons under the oak tree. Eliza moved through it all like a force of nature, organizing, teaching, mediating disputes, caring for the sick. She was everywhere at once, and people looked to her for answers to questions Ronan wouldn't have known how to answer. She'd become the heart of Hale's Crossing, and everyone knew it, but not everyone was happy about the changes. One afternoon, Ronan was working on a new storage shed when a man he didn't recognize rode into the settlement. The stranger was well-dressed, his clothes clean and expensive-looking, his horse groomed and healthy. He dismounted near the trading post and looked around with an expression that was equal parts curiosity and contempt. Ronan set down his hammer and walked over. "Help you with something?" The man turned to face him. He was in his 40s, with sharp features and eyes that calculated everything they saw. "I'm looking for the person in charge." "That would be me." The man's eyebrows went up. "You're Ronan Hale?" "That's right. I'm Edward Garvin. I represent the Northern Territories Land Company." He pulled a document from his saddlebag and held it out. "I'm here to discuss your settlement." Ronan didn't take the document. "What about it?" "Well, for starters, you're building on land that doesn't belong to you." The settlement had gone quiet. People had stopped what they were doing to watch and listen. Ronan felt their eyes on him, waiting to see how he'd respond. "We filed a claim," Ronan said, 2 years ago. "A claim isn't a deed, and the Northern Territories Company has acquired rights to this entire region. That includes your little, community here." Garvin looked around, his nose wrinkling slightly. "We're willing to be reasonable, of course. We'll give you 30 days to vacate. After that, we'll have to take legal action." "Legal action?" Thomas had appeared at Ronan's side, his face red with anger. "We built this place from nothing. You can't just take it." "Actually, we can, and we will." Garvin folded the document and tucked it back into his bag. Unless, of course, you'd like to discuss a purchase agreement, we're prepared to sell you the land for a fair price. How much? Ronan asked. Garvin named a figure that made several people gasp. It was more money than anyone in Hales Crossing had ever seen, let alone saved. That's not fair, someone shouted from the crowd. That's robbery. That's business, Garvin replied smoothly. You have 30 days to decide. Purchase the land or leave. Those are your options. He climbed back onto his horse and rode out, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Ronan stood there, his hands clenched into fists, trying to process what had just happened. 2 years of work, of building, of surviving, and now some company man in a clean suit was telling them it was all for nothing. Eliza found him an hour later, sitting alone by the creek. She sat down beside him without saying anything, just waiting. We're going to lose it, he said finally. We don't know that yet. You heard what he said. We can't afford to buy the land, and we can't fight a company with lawyers and money. So what do we do? I don't know. He picked up a stone and threw it into the water. Maybe we should just leave. Find somewhere else. And let them win? It's not about winning, it's about surviving. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Do you remember what you told me when we first came here? You said the land doesn't lie like people do. Well, the land is still here. It doesn't care who has a piece of paper saying they own it. It just is. That's not how the law works. Maybe the law is wrong. He looked at her. You want to fight this? I want to try. That night, they held a meeting in the largest cabin. Every adult in the settlement crowded inside, their faces tight with worry. Ronan stood at the front, Eliza beside him, and explained what Garvin had said. We have 3 choices, he said. We can pay, which we can't afford. We can leave, or we can fight. Fight how? Josiah asked. We're not lawyers. We don't know anything about land rights or companies. Then we learn, Eliza said. We find someone who does know. We figure out if their claim is even legitimate. And if it is, then we deal with that when we get there. But we don't just roll over and give up. There was a murmur of agreement from the crowd. People looked at each other, nodding, their expressions hardening with resolve. These were people who'd already lost everything once. They weren't eager to do it again. Thomas stood up. I say we fight, whatever it takes. Agreed, said Clara. We're with you, added Samuel. One by one, voices rose in support, and when the vote was called, it was unanimous. They would fight. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Ronan and Thomas rode south to the nearest town with a land office, looking for answers. What they found wasn't encouraging. The Northern Territories Land Company had indeed filed claims on a massive swath of land, including the area where Hales Crossing sat. The claims appeared to be legal, backed by territorial law, and a series of complex agreements that Ronan barely understood. But there were irregularities, dates that didn't match up, signatures that looked forged, small discrepancies that might not mean anything, or might mean everything. They hired a lawyer, a young man named Patrick Sullivan, who worked out of a cramped office above a general store. He wasn't impressive to look at, thin and pale with ink-stained fingers, but he listened carefully as Ronan explained the situation. You're right about the irregularities, Sullivan said, flipping through the documents they'd brought. But proving fraud is another matter entirely. You'd need evidence, witnesses, and time. How much time? Thomas asked. Months, maybe longer, and even then, there's no guarantee you'd win. What are our chances? Sullivan hesitated. Honestly, maybe 1 in 10. Ronan felt something heavy settle in his chest. That's it? Unless you can find proof that the company's claims are fraudulent. Real proof, not just suspicions. They rode back to Hales Crossing empty-handed and exhausted. Eliza met them at the edge of the settlement, and she knew before Ronan said a word that the news wasn't good. What did the lawyer say? She asked. He said we're screwed unless we can prove they're lying. Then we prove it. How? I don't know yet, but we will. She said it with such certainty that Ronan almost believed her. Almost. The 30-day deadline loomed over them like a storm cloud. People tried to go about their normal routines, planting crops and building and teaching, but the tension was palpable. Everyone knew what was at stake. Everyone understood that if they lost, everything they'd built would be gone. Eliza threw herself into research, writing to nearby towns and digging through land records, trying to find something, anything, that would help their case. She spent hours in dusty offices, reading through old claims and survey maps, her eyes straining in the dim light. Ronan went with her when he could, but most of the time he was needed at the settlement, keeping things running and trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. One evening, Eliza returned looking more tired than Ronan had ever seen her. She slumped into a chair and rubbed her eyes. "Anything?" he asked. "Maybe. I found records of another claim filed 10 years ago by a homesteader named Morrison. He claimed the same land the company is claiming now." "What happened to him?" "I don't know. The records just stop, like he disappeared. Or like someone made him disappear." Eliza nodded slowly. "If we could find him, or find proof that his claim was legitimate, it might invalidate the company's claim." "That's a big if. It's the only if we've got." They spent the next week searching for any trace of Morrison. Ronan asked around at trading posts and mining camps, showing the man's name to anyone who might have known him. Most people had never heard of him. But finally, in a small camp near the northern edge of the territory, an old prospector named Dutch squinted at the name and nodded. "Morrison. Yeah, I knew him. Quiet fellow. Had a claim up in the hills." "What happened to him?" Ronan asked. "Company men came. Told him his claim wasn't valid, that he had to leave. He refused. Next thing anyone knew, his cabin burned down and he was gone." "Dead?" "Don't know, never saw a body, but he never came back." Ronan felt a chill run down his spine. "These company men, they have names?" "One of them did. Garvin. Edward Garvin." That night, Ronan told Eliza what he'd learned. She listened in silence, her face pale. "They ran him off," she said. "Or worse. Probably worse. And now they're trying to do the same to us." "Looks that way." She stood up and paced the cabin, her hands balled into fists. "We need proof. Real proof that they did this. How are we supposed to get that? Morrison's gone. His records are gone. There's nothing left. There has to be something. People don't just vanish without leaving traces." But finding those traces proved nearly impossible. They searched the area where Morrison's cabin had been, now just a charred foundation overgrown with weeds. They talked to everyone who might have known him. They went back through land records, looking for anything that might connect Garvin to what had happened, and they came up empty. With a week left before the deadline, Eliza sat at the table in their cabin, surrounded by papers and maps, her head in her hands. "I don't know what else to do," she said. Ronan sat down across from her. "Maybe it's time to accept that we can't win this." "I won't accept that." "Eliza, no, I won't. These people came here because they had nowhere else to go, because we gave them a place that was theirs. And I'm not going to let some company take that away. Even if fighting means losing everything anyway." "Yes, even then." He looked at her, at the determination in her eyes, and felt something break inside him. She was willing to burn it all down rather than give up. And maybe that was the right choice. Maybe fighting and losing was better than surrendering without a fight. "All right," he said. "We fight." 3 days before the deadline, a stranger arrived at Hales Crossing. He was young, maybe 25, with nervous eyes and a way of looking over his shoulder like he expected someone to be following him. He asked to speak to Eliza and Ronan privately, and they took him to their cabin. "My name is James," he said, his voice shaking. "I worked for the Northern Territories Land Company, as a clerk." Ronan leaned forward. "Why are you here?" "Because what they're doing is wrong. I've seen the records. I know what happened to Morrison and a dozen others like him. The company's been running people off their land for years, using forged documents and intimidation. And when that doesn't work, they use worse." "Can you prove it?" Eliza asked. James reached into his coat and pulled out a thick envelope. "These are copies of internal documents, letters between Garvin and the company's lawyers, instructions on how to falsify claims, even a confession from one of the men who burned Morrison's cabin." Eliza took the envelope with trembling hands. "Why are you giving this to us?" "Because I'm tired of being part of it. Because I thought I was working for a legitimate business, and I found out I was working for criminals." He looked at them both. "And because I heard what you did during the fever, how you saved people. I figured if anyone deserved help, it was you." They spent the rest of the night going through the documents. James had brought everything they needed: proof of fraud, proof of intimidation, even proof of violence. It was enough to bury the Northern Territories Land Company and everyone associated with it. The next morning, they rode to the nearest marshal's office and turned over everything James had given them. The marshal, a grizzled man named Hawkins, read through the documents with increasing anger. "I've been hearing rumors about this company for years," he said, "but I never had proof. This changes everything." "What happens now?" Ronan asked. "Now I arrest Edward Garvin and anyone else involved, and you keep your land." Word spread through Hales Crossing like wildfire. People gathered around the fire pit, laughing and crying and hugging each other. They'd won. Against all odds, against a company with money and power and lawyers, they'd won. Eliza stood in the middle of it all, tears streaming down her face, surrounded by people thanking her and praising her and telling her she was a hero. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt exhausted and relieved and terrified of what might have happened if James hadn't shown up. Ronan found her later, sitting alone by the creek. He sat down beside her and put his arm around her shoulders. "You did it," he said. "We did it. All of us. But you didn't give up, even when I wanted to." She leaned against him. "I was scared the whole time." "I know." "What if we'd lost?" "We didn't. But we could have." He kissed the top of her head. "But we didn't." A week later, Edward Garvin was arrested along with 3 other company officials. The Northern Territories Land Company collapsed under the weight of the scandal, its assets seized and its claims invalidated. Hales Crossing's claim to the land was officially recognized, and for the first time since they'd arrived, Ronan and Eliza could say with certainty that the place they'd built truly belonged to them. But the victory came with a cost. The fight had taken everything they had: their energy, their resources, their peace of mind. And as summer wore on, Ronan noticed that Eliza wasn't bouncing back the way she usually did. She was quieter, more withdrawn. She still worked, still helped people, but there was a weariness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. One night, he found her sitting on the porch of their cabin, staring out at the settlement. "You okay?" he asked. "I don't know. Talk to me." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I keep thinking about what could have happened. If James hadn't come, if we'd lost, all those people, they would have had nowhere to go, and it would have been my fault. That's not true, isn't it? I'm the one who convinced them to fight. I'm the one who told them we could win. And you were right. This time, but what about next time? There won't be a next time. You don't know that." She looked at him, and he saw fear in her eyes, real, deep fear. "I'm not strong enough for this, Ronan. I'm not smart enough or brave enough or—" "Stop." He took her hands. "You're all of those things. You're the strongest person I know." "I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm one mistake away from breaking." "Then break, and I'll be here to put you back together." She closed her eyes, and tears slipped down her cheeks. "What if you can't? Then we'll figure it out together." They sat there in silence, holding each other while the sun set and the settlement settled in for the night. And Ronan realized, not for the first time, that the woman he'd married, the woman everyone called a hero, was just as scared and uncertain as everyone else. She just hid it better. Summer faded into fall, and life at Hales Crossing found a new rhythm. The threat of the land company was gone, but it had left scars. People were more cautious, less trusting of outsiders. They built higher fences, kept closer watch on the trails leading into the settlement. The openness that had defined the place in its early days was replaced by something harder, more guarded. But the settlement also thrived. The harvest was good, better than anyone had hoped. New families arrived, drawn by stories of the place that had stood up to a corrupt company and won. The school expanded again. Josiah's trading post became a legitimate business, drawing merchants from as far as 3 territories away. And Eliza slowly began to find her footing again. She still had bad days when the weight of everything felt too heavy to bear. But she also had good days when she could laugh and work and feel like herself again. Ronan watched over her, giving her space when she needed it, and pulling her close when she didn't. One crisp October morning, a rider came into the settlement carrying a letter. It was addressed to Eliza, written in careful handwriting on expensive paper. She opened it and read in silence, her expression unreadable. "What is it?" Ronan asked. "It's from Iron Hollow, from the mayor." "What does he want?" She handed him the letter. He read it twice, not quite believing what he was seeing. The town council of Iron Hollow was formally apologizing for their treatment of Eliza. They acknowledged the cruelty she'd endured, the mockery, the years of isolation, and they were asking her to return to represent Iron Hollow in the territorial assembly. "They want you to be their representative," Ronan said, looking up from the letter. "I know. What are you going to say?" She took the letter back and folded it carefully. "I'm going to say no." "You sure?" "I'm sure." She looked out at the settlement, at the cabins and the garden, and the people moving about their day. "This is my home now. These are my people. Iron Hollow had their chance with me, and they made their choice. I'm making mine." Ronan smiled. "You want me to write the response? Or you want to do it?" "I'll do it." She stood up and stretched. "Besides, I should probably be polite about it." "Since when are you polite?" She laughed, and the sound was so unexpected and genuine that it made Ronan's chest ache. "Since never. But I figure I should at least pretend." That night, she wrote the response by candlelight. It was short and direct, thanking the council for their apology but declining their offer. She didn't explain why. She didn't need to. The people of Iron Hollow had made her what she was by breaking her down, and Hale's Crossing had made her what she became by building her back up. She sealed the letter and handed it to the writer the next morning. He tipped his hat and rode off, carrying her refusal back to the town that had once been her prison. And as Eliza watched him disappear down the trail, she felt something lift from her shoulders, a weight she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. She was free. Not just from Iron Hollow, but from the need for their approval, their acceptance, their validation. She didn't need them anymore. She never had. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. Hale's Crossing grew into something neither Ronan nor Eliza had imagined when they first cleared that patch of wilderness. By the time the settlement reached its 5th year, there were over 100 people living there, spread across 24 cabins and a handful of larger buildings. The trading post had expanded into a general store. Ruth's school now had 3 teachers and operated out of a proper schoolhouse built from milled lumber. There was a blacksmith, a tannery, a mill powered by the creek. The settlement had become a town, and the town had become a community. But it wasn't perfect. Nothing built by human hands ever was. Disputes still broke out over land boundaries and water rights. People still got sick, and sometimes they died despite Eliza's best efforts. Winters were still brutal, and there were years when the crops failed and everyone went hungry. The wilderness didn't care how hard they worked, or how much they wanted to succeed. It was indifferent to their struggles, and that indifference could be crushing. But the people of Hale's Crossing had learned something that set them apart from other settlements. They'd learned that survival wasn't just about strength or resources or luck. It was about showing up for each other, day after day, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. Ronan and Eliza had shown them that. Not through grand gestures or inspiring speeches, but through the quiet, relentless work of building a life together in a place that didn't want them to succeed. They fought. They failed. They picked themselves up and tried again. And people watched, and they learned. One spring morning, 7 years after they'd first arrived, Eliza woke to find Ronan already up and dressed, standing by the window. "What are you looking at?" she asked, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "Just thinking." "About what?" He gestured toward the settlement. "About how different everything is now. Remember when it was just us?" "I remember." She got up and stood beside him. "You hated it when people started showing up." "I did." "Do you still?" He thought about it. "No, I miss the quiet sometimes." "We can still have quiet. Just not all the time." He smiled. "That's fair." They stood there together, watching as the settlement came to life. Smoke rose from chimneys. Children ran between cabins, their voices high and clear. A rooster crowed somewhere in the distance. It was ordinary and unremarkable, and that was what made it precious. Later that day, a delegation arrived from Iron Hollow. 3 men and a woman, all dressed in their finest clothes, riding horses that looked like they'd never seen a hard day's work. The settlement gathered to meet them, curious and wary in equal measure. The leader of the group was a man named Harrison, who'd taken over as mayor after the previous one died. He was younger than Ronan expected, maybe 40, with a politician's smile and eyes that never quite met yours directly. "Mr. Hale, Mrs. Hale," he said, dismounting, "thank you for seeing us. We didn't have much choice. Ronan said. You showed up. Harrison's smile didn't waver. Yes, well, we come with a proposal, one we hope you'll find beneficial. We're listening. Harrison gestured to one of the men who pulled out a rolled document. Iron Hollow has grown considerably in recent years. We've established new businesses, attracted investment from back east. The territory is considering us for incorporation as an official municipality. Good for you, Eliza said. Indeed, but to qualify, we need to demonstrate that we have regional influence, that we're not just an isolated town, but part of a larger network. He paused. That's where you come in. How so? Ronan asked. We'd like to propose a formal alliance, Iron Hollow and Hales Crossing working together. Shared resources, shared governance. We bring capital and connections. You bring credibility. The story of Hales Crossing has spread far beyond this territory. People know what you built here. They admire it. And you want to use that, Eliza said flatly. I prefer to think of it as partnership. Call it whatever you want. The answer is no. Harrison blinked. You haven't even heard the full proposal. Don't need to. We're not interested in being part of Iron Hollow's political ambitions. Mrs. Hale, please, be reasonable. This alliance would benefit both our communities. We could build a road between our settlements, establish regular trade routes. Your people would have access to resources they don't have now. We have everything we need, Ronan said. Do you? What happens when someone gets seriously injured and needs a real doctor? What happens when you need legal representation or... We figure it out, Eliza interrupted. The same way we always have, without Iron Hollow's help. Harrison's smile finally cracked. You're making a mistake. The territory is changing. Towns that don't adapt get left behind. Then we'll get left behind. You can't survive on stubbornness forever. We've done pretty well so far. Harrison looked like he wanted to argue further, but the woman in his group put a hand on his arm and shook her head. He took a breath and forced the smile back onto his face. Very well. The offer stands should you change your mind, but I have to ask, why? Why turn down an opportunity that could make life easier for everyone here? Eliza stepped forward. Because we didn't build this place to make life easier. We built it to make life ours. And the moment we tie ourselves to Iron Hollow, it stops being ours. It becomes yours. So thank you for the offer, but we'll pass. The delegation left shortly after, riding back south with disappointed expressions. The settlement watched them go, and when they were out of sight, someone started clapping. Then another person joined in, and another, until the whole crowd was applauding. Not for Eliza's words exactly, but for what they represented. The refusal to compromise, to sell out, to become something they weren't just for the sake of convenience. That night, as Ronan and Eliza lay in bed, she said, Do you think I was too harsh? No. Harrison was right about some things. We could use a real doctor, and a lawyer, and better tools, better supplies. We could, but at what cost? Maybe no cost. Maybe it would have been fine. Or maybe it would have been the beginning of the end. The moment we let someone else make decisions for us, we lose what makes this place special. She rolled over to face him. And what's that? That it's ours. Completely, totally ours. We don't answer to anyone. We don't owe anyone. We built it, and we get to decide what it becomes. That's a lot of responsibility. It is. What if we make the wrong choices? Then we live with them, but at least they're our choices. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just stubborn. She laughed and kissed him. Same thing sometimes. The seasons turned one after another, and Hales Crossing continued to evolve. Ruth retired from teaching and was replaced by a younger woman named Marie, who'd arrived from back east with fresh ideas about education. Josiah sold the trading post to a couple named Frank and Helen, who expanded it even further. Thomas built a sawmill that employed 12 men and produced enough lumber to supply settlements for 50 miles around. And Eliza, slowly but surely, began to step back. It wasn't a conscious decision at first. She just found herself doing less of the day-to-day organizing, delegating more to others. Margaret, who'd lost her husband during the fever and stayed to raise her daughter alone, took over most of the medical duties. Samuel, who'd grown from a nervous young man into someone confident and capable, started handling disputes and mediating arguments. Catherine, who'd mourned her husband for 2 long years before finally smiling again, organized the harvest festivals and community gatherings. Ronan noticed the change but didn't comment on it until one evening when Eliza came home early, something she almost never did. "You feeling okay?" he asked. "I'm fine, just tired." "You're always tired." "Yeah, well, I'm getting old." She was 32. Hardly old by any measure. But Ronan understood what she meant. The years had worn on her in ways that didn't show on the surface. The constant responsibility, the endless stream of people needing help, the weight of knowing that so many lives depended on the choices she made, it had taken a toll. "Maybe it's time to let other people carry some of the weight," he said. "I have been. I mean really let them. Not just delegate tasks, but step back and let them lead." She looked at him. "You think I'm holding on too tight?" "I think you're afraid that if you let go, everything will fall apart." "And what if it does?" "Then it falls apart, and they'll figure out how to put it back together. You can't protect everyone from every mistake, Eliza. They have to learn to do this themselves." She knew he was right. She'd known it for a while. But knowing something and accepting it were two different things. Over the next year, Eliza made a conscious effort to step back. She stopped being the first person everyone came to with problems. She started saying no when people asked for help with things they could handle themselves. And slowly, painfully, she learned to trust that the community she'd helped build was strong enough to stand without her holding it up. It was harder than she expected. There were days when she saw someone struggling and had to physically stop herself from intervening. Days when decisions were made that she disagreed with, and she had to bite her tongue and let people make their own mistakes. But she did it. And the settlement didn't fall apart. If anything, it grew stronger. People stepped up in ways she hadn't anticipated. Margaret developed new treatments for common ailments, improving on the remedies Eliza had taught her. Samuel created a system for resolving disputes that was fairer and more efficient than anything Eliza had used. Catherine organized a cooperative where families could share resources and help each other during hard times. And Eliza, freed from the constant pressure of being everything to everyone, found herself with time to just be. To work in the garden because she enjoyed it, not because it needed doing. To sit by the creek and watch the water. To spend long evenings with Ronan, talking about nothing in particular. It was during one of those evenings, 10 years after they'd first arrived, that he asked her a question she'd been avoiding. "Do you ever regret it?" "Regret what?" "All of this. Leaving Iron Hollow. Coming here. Everything that happened after." She thought about it. Really thought about it. "No," she said finally. "I regret some of the choices I made along the way. Things I said, things I didn't say. But the big decision, coming here with you, I've never regretted that. Not once. Even during the bad times?" "Especially during the bad times. Because the bad times taught me who I was. Who I could be." She took his hand. "Iron Hollow told me I was nothing. You gave me a chance to find out if that was true. And it wasn't. You always knew that." "No, I didn't. I hoped it. But I didn't know it. Not until I proved it to myself." He squeezed her hand. "You proved it to a lot of people. Maybe. But the only person who really mattered was me." That winter was one of the mildest anyone could remember. The snow came late and melted early, and the hunting was good enough that no one went hungry. It felt like a gift, a reprieve after so many years of struggle. People celebrated with more enthusiasm than usual, throwing parties and gatherings that lasted late into the night. But spring brought unexpected visitors. It was late April when a group of riders appeared on the trail from the south. There were maybe 20 of them, too many to be traders and too organized to be random travelers. The settlement went on alert, people gathering near the center while Ronan and a handful of others went to meet them. The lead rider was an older man, maybe 60, with gray hair and a face weathered by decades of sun and wind. He raised his hand in greeting as he approached. "We're looking for Eliza Hale," he said. Ronan's hand moved toward the rifle slung across his back. "Who's asking?" "My name is William Morrison. I'm told she might know something about what happened to my brother." It took Ronan a moment to place the name. Morrison. The homesteader who'd been run off his land by the Northern Territories Company. The one whose burned cabin they'd found all those years ago. "Your brother," Ronan said slowly. "Thomas Morrison?" "That's right. I heard that evidence about what happened to him came from this settlement. I'd like to speak with whoever found it. Eliza had come up behind Ronan. She stepped forward. I'm Eliza Hale. We didn't find the evidence. Someone brought it to us. A clerk from the company. William dismounted. Up close, he looked tired and sad. The kind of sad that came from carrying grief for too long. My brother disappeared 12 years ago. I've been searching for answers ever since. When I heard about the trial, about the documents that proved what the company did, I thought maybe, finally, I could get some closure. What do you want from us? Ronan asked. Just information. Anything you can tell me about what happened to him. They took William to the cabin and showed him everything they had. The documents James had provided, the witness statements, the evidence of the fire. William read through it all in silence, his hands shaking. They killed him, he said finally. That's what this says. They burned his cabin with him inside. We don't know that for sure, Eliza said gently. The documents say they burned the cabin, but there's no proof he was inside. He might have escaped. Then where is he? Why hasn't he come back? Eliza didn't have an answer for that. William sat there for a long time, staring at the papers, and then he started to cry. Not loud, heaving sobs, but quiet tears that ran down his weathered face and dripped onto the table. I just wanted to know, he whispered. I just wanted to know what happened to him. They gave him a place to stay for the night, and the next morning he prepared to leave. But before he mounted his horse, he turned to Eliza. Thank you, he said, for caring enough to fight. My brother would have liked that. He always said the world needed more people willing to stand up to bullies. I'm sorry we couldn't give you better news, Eliza said. You gave me the truth. That's worth more than comfort. He rode off with his men, and Eliza watched him go with a heavy heart. Ronan came up beside her and put his arm around her shoulders. You okay? He asked. I keep thinking about all the people like Morrison, people who got crushed by the world, and nobody cared enough to remember their names. You cared. Not soon enough to save him. You can't save everyone who came before you. You can only help the people who are here now. She leaned against him. Is that enough? It has to be. Summer came, and with it a new challenge. The territorial government announced plans to build a railroad through the region, a line that would connect the mining camps in the north with the cities in the south. The proposed route ran within 10 miles of Hales Crossing, close enough to bring opportunities, but also close enough to bring problems. A railway official visited the settlement to discuss the project. He was polite and professional, explaining how the railroad would bring jobs and commerce, how it would make travel easier and goods cheaper. He also made it clear that the railroad was coming whether Hales Crossing wanted it or not. What we're offering is a chance to be part of it, he said. We'll need workers, supplies, land for the station. You could benefit significantly. The settlement held a meeting to discuss the proposal. Opinions were divided. Some people saw the railroad as progress, a chance to connect with the wider world and improve their lives. Others saw it as a threat, worried that it would bring too many outsiders, too much change, too fast. The debate went on for hours, voices rising and falling, arguments growing heated. Finally, Eliza stood up. Can I say something? The room went quiet. We've spent 10 years building this place into something that works for us. We fought off companies and survived winters and created something we're proud of. And now we're faced with a choice. Do we embrace the railroad and everything it brings, or do we try to keep things the way they are? What do you think we should do? Someone asked. I don't know, and that's the point. This isn't my decision to make. It's not Ronan's decision. It's all of ours. Because this place belongs to all of us now. She looked around the room. I'm not the leader here. I never was. I was just someone who tried to help when help was needed. But Hales Crossing doesn't need me to tell it what to do anymore. It needs all of you to figure that out together. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Thomas stood up. She's right. We need to vote. Not just a few of us, but everyone. Every adult in the settlement gets a say. They voted the next day. It took hours to count all the ballots, but when the results were tallied, the decision was clear. Hales Crossing would work with the railroad, but on their own terms. They would provide labor and supplies, but they wouldn't sell land for a station. The railroad could run nearby, but it wouldn't run through their settlement. It was a compromise, the kind that left everyone a little bit unsatisfied, but also a little bit hopeful. And when the railway official returned to hear their decision, he accepted it without argument. You drive a hard bargain, he said, But fair enough. We'll build the station 10 miles south, and you can decide how much or how little you want to engage with it. That works for us, Thomas said, and it did work. The railroad brought changes. More travelers passing through, more goods available at the trading post, more opportunities for young people who wanted to see the world beyond Hales Crossing. But it didn't destroy what they'd built. The settlement remained its own place, with its own character, its own way of doing things. Years passed. Ronan's hair went gray. Eliza's hands developed calluses that never quite went away, marks from a lifetime of hard work. Children grew into adults. New families arrived and old ones left. The settlement changed, as all living things must, but its core remained the same. One autumn afternoon, 15 years after they'd first arrived, Ronan and Eliza walked to the spot where their original cabin had stood. They'd built a new house years ago, larger and more comfortable, but they still came back to this place sometimes, just to remember. "You think we did okay?" Eliza asked. "I think we did the best we could." "That's not the same thing." "No, but it's enough." She sat down on a stump, and he sat beside her. The settlement spread out below them, smoke rising from chimneys, people moving about their day. It was bigger than they'd ever imagined, more complex, more alive. "What do you think will happen to this place after we're gone?" she asked. "It'll keep going, change and grow, and probably become something completely different." "That doesn't bother you?" "Why would it? We didn't build this place for it to stay frozen in time. We built it so people could have a chance. What they do with that chance is up to them." She took his hand. "When did you become so accepting of things you can't control?" "Around the same time you did." She smiled. "I'm not sure I have. I still want to fix everything." "I know, but you've gotten better at not trying." They sat there until the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Then they stood up and walked back to the settlement, to the home they'd made, to the life they'd built together. More years passed. Ronan's joints started to ache in the mornings. Eliza's eyesight grew weaker. They slowed down, took on fewer responsibilities, spent more time just being with each other. The settlement barely noticed. It had grown beyond them, developed its own rhythms and patterns, its own way of handling problems. And that was exactly how it should be. One spring morning, 20 years after they'd first arrived, riders appeared on the trail from Iron Hollow. But this time, they weren't officials or politicians. They were families, men, women, children, looking tired and desperate. Ronan met them at the edge of the settlement. "What happened?" The lead man, someone Ronan didn't recognize, dismounted. "Iron Hollow's gone. Fire swept through 3 days ago, burned most of the town to the ground. We lost everything." "Anyone hurt?" "A few, but mostly we have nowhere to go." Ronan looked back at the settlement, at Eliza standing in the doorway of their house, watching. She met his eyes and nodded. "You can stay here," Ronan said. "We'll figure out the rest later." The refugees from Iron Hollow integrated into Hales Crossing over the following months. Some stayed permanently. Others moved on once they'd recovered, but all of them remembered the place that had taken them in when they had nothing. Years later, one of those refugees, a young woman who'd been just a child when the fire happened, became the settlement's first elected mayor. She ran on a platform of preserving Hales Crossing's independence while also building bridges with other communities. She won by a landslide. Ronan and Eliza attended her inauguration, now in their 60s, their faces lined with age but their eyes still sharp. The new mayor gave a speech about the values that made Hales Crossing special: resilience, compassion, independence, community. And when she finished, she turned to Ronan and Eliza and asked them to say a few words. Eliza stood up slowly, Ronan's hand steadying her. She looked out at the crowd, over 200 people now, most of whom she'd never even met. "I don't have much to say that you don't already know," she began. Hales Crossing was built by people who had nowhere else to go. People who'd been rejected, dismissed, told they weren't good enough. We came here because the rest of the world didn't want us. And we built something anyway, not because we were special or talented or blessed, but because we didn't have a choice. We either survived together or we died alone. She paused, her voice growing stronger. "The town that laughed at me is gone. The company that tried to steal our land is gone. But we're still here. And we'll keep being here long after I'm gone because what we built wasn't based on one person or one idea. It was based on the simple truth that people are stronger together than they are apart. That's the only lesson that matters. Everything else is just details. She sat down to thunderous applause. Ronan leaned over and whispered, "That was good." "I meant every word." "I know." The celebration went on late into the night. Ronan and Eliza left early, walking slowly back to their house. Inside, Eliza sat down in her chair by the fire, and Ronan made tea the way she liked it, strong and sweet. "Do you think they understood?" she asked. "The speech?" "The point, that it was never about us. It was always about what people could do if someone just gave them a chance." "I think they understood." She sipped her tea. "Good, because I'm tired of being treated like some kind of hero. I'm just a woman who got lucky." "You made your own luck." "We made our own luck, together." He sat down beside her, and they watched the fire burn low. Outside, they could hear voices, laughter, music, the sounds of a community that was alive and thriving. "I'm glad we came here," Eliza said quietly. "Me too. Even with everything that happened, all the hard times, especially because of the hard times, they made us who we are." She reached for his hand and he took it. They sat like that for a long time, two people who'd built a life together against impossible odds. They'd fought and struggled and survived. They'd failed and succeeded and learned to live with both. They weren't perfect. They never had been. But they'd been enough. For each other, for the settlement, for the hundreds of lives they'd touched along the way. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The fire burned down to embers. The voices outside faded. And Ronan and Eliza went to bed, their hands still clasped together, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. Years later, long after both of them were gone, their story was still told around fires and in schoolrooms. But the story changed with each telling, as stories do. Some versions made them larger than life, heroes without flaws. Others focused on specific events, turning them into legends. But the people who'd actually known them, who'd lived alongside them and worked with them and argued with them, they told a different story. They talked about how Ronan never learned to smile easily, how he could be stubborn and harsh and sometimes cruel. They talked about how Eliza struggled with doubt, how there were days when she couldn't get out of bed, how she sometimes made decisions based on fear instead of wisdom. They told the truth, that Ronan and Eliza weren't saints or heroes. They were just two broken people who found each other and decided to build something that mattered. And in doing so, they showed everyone around them that being broken wasn't the same as being worthless, that the cracks in a person could let the light through if they were willing to let it. The settlement that started as a desperate escape became a beacon, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. It didn't promise easy answers or happy endings. It promised a chance, a place where your past didn't define your future, where the person you'd been didn't matter as much as the person you were trying to become. And people came. Generation after generation, they came looking for that chance. Some found it. Others didn't. But the settlement remained, growing and changing and evolving, built on the foundation that two outcasts had laid all those years ago. The town that laughed at the man who chose the woman nobody wanted eventually faded into history, remembered only as a footnote in someone else's story. But Hale's Crossing endured. Not as a monument to Ronan and Eliza, but as a testament to what ordinary people could accomplish when they refused to accept the limitations others placed on them. In the end, that was their real legacy. Not the buildings they constructed or the lives they saved, but the idea they proved. That worth isn't given by society or inherited from family or bestowed by fortune. It's created, day by day, through the choices we make and the people we choose to be. The world tried to tell Eliza she was nothing. Ronan gave her a chance to prove them wrong, and together they built a place where everyone got that same chance. Some took it, some didn't, but it was always there, waiting, and that made all the difference.